Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is...
Until the End of Crime. Cameron, what is the worst way you've ever had a date end?
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I knew it wouldn't be a question that you would like.
He said something about going and eating at a Mexican restaurant that
Your
he
fave?
liked. Or he was going to cook Mexican. And what ended up happening is he said that was going to be the one, but he just picked up takeout from the place that we would have gone to eat at. So I did the thing where I sent my location and everything to everybody. I sent his information. His first name was the last name of a couple former presidents. And his
Bush.
last name...
His name was Bush?
Maybe. And his last name was the name of an author. So his name was like, I don't know, very...
Bush Picoult.
Very formal sounding, honestly.
He sounds pretentious, but I guess he wasn't.
I don't think he really was pretentious. I went over and ate this Mexican food out of a fucking styrofoam.
Not out of a to-go box.
I think he did actually give me plates. I don't know. I was there. I wasn't feeling any connection whatsoever. We watched some stuff on maybe YouTube. I don't know. And then I was like, okay, well, I gotta go. And he insisted, this is probably one of those times where you're in a situation and as a woman in particular, you know that it's better to just like go along with it.
Right.
But he really wanted a kiss before I left. And I don't know if he thought that was going to make me, like, he was going to kiss me passionately and then I was going to be like, I'll stay. Definitely did not happen. But yeah, I went through with that and then I was like, gotta go. And then I immediately texted my friend and I was like, I just left. Just so you know, I am leaving. I am safe, but not it.
Not safe from a bad date.
I might end up cutting that and just telling you about a different date.
Okay.
So, this is crazy too. Okay.
You could leave both.
I could. I went on a date with a guy whose name is the same as a guy from a popular sitcom in the 2000s. And we went to the Domain in Austin to the Starbucks Reserve. And we were there for, I think, 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we talked, whatever.
Did you hit it off?
No.
But you were there for 5 hours?
Yeah, we were fine talking. And I think that we probably would have been fine as friends. But he was very skeeved out when I talked about donating plasma. He was like, I can't do needles. And I was like, neither could I, but that was part of why I did donate plasma.
I love that you talked about that on a first date, giving plasma.
He may have seen the scars on my elbows. I am on Do Not Disturb.
Sure.
The worst way that a date for me ever ended was, it was the president author guy who really thought that he was gonna, I don't know, swoon me with his mouth.
He must have thought he had magic lips, baby. He thought he was gonna really get you to ride the Presidential Express.
I had already put my purse on. Like I was not
out the door.
I was not
purse in hand. Dignity intact.
You will forever try to make me relive all of these moments that I have just not cared to think about.
Well, you're welcome. You know, I know that the question isn't for me, but I don't think I've had a date end badly. It's always nothing after the date, or was nothing after the date that was like, oh, okay. Like being ghosted.
I definitely ghosted the president author.
I'm gonna say it, and I don't know if listeners will agree. I think that ghosting is the worst. I think it's an awful thing to do. I think it's nasty. I think it's selfish. I think that basic human decency would lead one to saying, hi, I'm not interested, but thank you for the nice time.
Except for when you do say it and they disregard that.
Now that's
which
different.
is how we ended up with me just never responding to him again.
But is that what he did? Like, did you say I'm not interested and then he was crazy?
Yes, he tried to make plans and I said no, and then he just kept, and I was like,
okay, well, see, that's different than you do ghost. But that's not ghosting. That's like you've been aggravated, borderline stalked, at least harassed. Ghosting, I think, is more of I'm not interested, so I just stop communicating.
Yeah.
So I think that's different.
Sure.
What your situation is different.
Sure.
But I hate ghosting. And I've never really been ghosted except in one instance. And that shit made me so mad. It made me so mad that I was like, I'm about to get in my fucking car, drive up to this person's place of work and be like, ignore me now, bitch. I didn't do that. But sometimes crazy does pop into my brain and it says, do me, do me. And I have to remind myself, I don't need to do you, crazy. But speaking of crazy,
right.
I want to take you on a trip to a small suburban commuter town in Ontario, Canada, October 3rd, 1993.
It's October 3rd?
Yeah. What, we were Wednesdays? No.
Gruel.
Asked for a pencil. What happens on October 3rd?
He asked me for the date.
He asked me for the date. It's
me
October 3rd. Back in Barrie, Ontario. October 3rd. Small town, small community. Saturday night. A time to let it rip. Or get ripped. But not for everyone. See, it was later in the evening on this Saturday night. And a Baptist deacon had checked his watch and wondered quietly, what is my granddaughter still doing up? We have to go to church in the morning.
Did you say what time it was?
Just that it was late.
Okay. How old is the granddaughter?
Don't know. Do you remember your case last week when you didn't know anything about anybody?
I knew their ages.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe you did. I just remember asking questions that are not being answered.
Desiree was 30. Joseph was 30. Aram was 38.
Okay, the granddaughter's 22.
Okay, that's different than 7. You see how that matters?
Okay, so she's 22, 24.
Okay.
Somewhere in her 20s, but
She's
not
in her
like
20s.
late 20s.
Yeah.
Early to mid 20s. It was far too late, he thought.
9 p.m.
When he went downstairs, he asked his granddaughter's date to leave, reminding her that they would all need to be at church in the morning.
Okay, I have a prediction.
Okay.
Before he goes,
Uh-huh.
the grandfather's going to insist on a little makeout sesh.
Between him and the date?
Yeah.
Or watching his granddaughter and him make out?
No. Between him and the date.
Wait, why?
Because that's what happened to me.
His grandpa came in and said, make out with me, bitch. We have to go to church in the morning.
No.
Okay, so not anything like it, but I guess kind of. Barrie is a city in central Ontario, Canada. It's situated along the Kempenfelt Bay, which is an arm of Lake Simcoe, approximately 55 miles north of Toronto, which I think they say Toronto. They don't put that middle T in there, right?
Unless they're Brooklyn Heights. House of Heights. That's how we do it in Toronto.
Okay. But Priyanka doesn't say it like that.
I don't think that Canadians... I don't think that they pronounce the second
Canucks? Are they called Canucks? Oh, it kind of sounds like a slur. You know what?
It's for you to think that I would know.
Okay. In the early 1990s, it was still a town, but it was a commuter town. And it did happen to be one of the fastest growing communities in Canada. Barrie was always considered a really safe place. It was, again, a community where residents were so comfortable that they left their doors unlocked and felt secure in their neighborhoods. Are you so tired of people leaving their doors unlocked?
Yeah.
I mean,
Does
it's
it
the
have-
90s.
Does it have a locking mechanism? What harm does it do to just lock it?
I don't know.
I understand feeling really safe in your little community, but the other day I went to go do a safe exchange thing, and the person took longer than anticipated based on what they said, but apparently their directions sent them in the wrong direction. And so I pulled up my cameras at home and I was like, this was a ruse. They used the coordinates from the photos that I post to figure out my house, and then they lured me out of it so they could go rob me.
Using metadata from a photo.
You can.
The next day, October 4th, 1993, 9:10 a.m., morning broke quietly over the residential neighborhood on Peel Street, but the stillness was deceptive.
Are all of the names of streets and towns in this also going to be verbs?
Maybe.
Barrie, Peel.
Barrie is Barrie in this instance.
I did assume, but you said that they felt safe in Barrie, and I was like, really? Because Barrie to me sounds like hiding things.
Yeah, on Peel Street, and it is P-E-E-L. P-E-E, P-E-E, P-E-E. That's two E's. P-E-E-L. Peel Street.
P-E-E-L?
P-E-E-L. P-E-E-L.
This is riveting. I think this is going to be our
Sorry.
most listened to segment.
Sorry. I'm telling you, though, it's P-E-E, P-E-E-L. Peel. Why are you... I keep hearing three E's, but I think I'm only saying two. P-E-E-L.
You're saying two, but P has the
P
E
has
sound
an
built
E.
in.
Yes.
Yeah. Built in.
P-E-E. P-E-E-L. Peel Street. Okay. Wow. Wow, that threw me. Okay. Two detectives, Brian Schultz and Paul McGarry, stepped onto the scene of a horrifying discovery. A grisly triple murder. Uniformed officers, yes.
A locked door is often a deterrent enough for people to not come in. A triple homicide is probably somebody who knew the family, or it could have been an inside job. I'm not saying that somebody, a stranger or whatever, broke in and killed three people, but...
I mean, it's never a stranger when we talk about grisly homicides.
Not never.
Not never. Not
But
never.
Not
But
usually.
rarely. Mm-hmm. Uniformed officers already on site briefed Schultz and McGarry as soon as they arrived. Parishioners of the Baptist Church, where I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but Grandpappy is a deacon.
Deacon, you did.
Oh, okay. So parishioners were concerned that he, and his name is Ellsworth Beers. I don't know why I said it like that. Parishioners.
Ellsworth Beers.
Jesus. Parishioners concerned when Deacon Ellsworth Beers and his granddaughter Pam hadn't shown up at church that morning, alerted authorities.
Where was her date? It sounds like her date ended in a triple homicide.
The detectives moved swiftly to the basement bedroom to view the first victim. Deacon Ellsworth Beers lay face down on the basement floor, his body in a large pool of his own blood. Deacon Ellsworth had suffered a brutal attack. He was beaten mercilessly, strangled, and then repeatedly stabbed in the back. Detective McGarry noted that the vicious wounds also happened to be around his throat. So not only was he stabbed in the back and strangled, but he had also been stabbed in the throat repeatedly.
Did this date go into a blind rage when he was asked to leave?
Detective Schultz felt immediate alarm. The sheer ferocity and excessive nature of the attack resonated deeply. Something about the overwhelming violence felt really personal, fueled by rage, by frenzy. The detectives then moved upward towards the second floor. There, they found Pam Constable, the deacon's granddaughter. Pam lay face down on her bed, hands tied behind her back, feet bound together. Her death had been much quieter, but no less cruel. A ligature mark, well, actually, the ligature itself remained tightened around her neck. Strangulation, no visible blood. Pam Constable had not been stabbed. which really contrasted to the kind of savagery of her grandfather's murder. Are you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that I would like to know who the third victim is, because if it's the date, then I'm not on the right track. If it is not the date, then I believe that the date is responsible for the killings in which a male victim poses a more imposing threat and a female victim who was strangled and bound is probably more sexually motivated.
In another upstairs room, a third victim awaited discovery. A young man whose identity police could not confirm. He had been restrained similarly to Pam, hands and feet bound tightly. Unlike Pam, though, this victim lay amid a horrifying scene of bloodshed. More stab wounds, more violently placed than what was seen on the deacon.
If this is the date, then this is probably Pam's ex responsible for this.
So on this victim, there were stab wounds kind of all along the back of his neck. And it looked like it had kind of been meticulous, but also kind of in a fervor. Like it was just, but like it had a point, an intention. I mean, killing, obviously, but.
Right, but like, it almost sounds like you're saying that, I don't know, a pattern was.
Yeah, I mean, not a pattern, but I don't know. Detective McGarry recalls kind of this vivid feeling of shock that he felt seeing the carnage, the unrestrained fury that was evident in each stab wound, the amount of blood, the chaotic evidence of uncontrolled rage. The house on Peel Street had become a scene of nightmarish violence. As forensic investigators combed through the residence, they uncovered a pattern of details that kind of deepened the horror. Again, two of the victims, Pam and the unidentified young man, had been tightly bound at the wrist and ankles. The ligature used on Pam was actually a scarf that was, again, still cinched around her neck. They were not able to identify any kind of murder weapon at the scene. There was no knife or blunt object or anything that could have inflicted the damage that our victims faced. Also, weirdly enough, one of the home phones had been ripped from the wall entirely. I don't know what would motivate a perpetrator to rip a phone out of the wall, but that is what happened.
What do you...
You know, like the phones built into the fucking wall back when they had home phones.
I do know, but
yeah.
Why do you not know what would possess somebody to rip it?
Why would you rip a phone out of the wall if you killed somebody?
Because if there were 3 victims and there was one perp, which we don't know, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But
I mean, I know.
I know you know, but I don't.
I know the whole story and it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. You would rip it out so that one of the victims can't call for help, right?
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess.
I don't know if it's 1 on 3, as I mentioned.
You could just, like, rip the phone. Like, you don't have to take the whole piece of the, like, phone, the device, the phone furniture out of the wall. You could have just grabbed the receiver, right?
Yeah.
Because they had the little jack that you would plug into the receiver.
Right.
Or pulled the... I don't know. I feel like there's easier things than pulling the shit out of the wall.
Okay, so if you leave it on the wall and you don't have the receiver on it, and if 911 is a thing, which it was by the 90s, you can still dial 911, which would trigger a call to emergency services. And I believe Canada has 911. I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I think they do have
Been wrong
emergency
before.
services, and I think it is 911.
So if it's still attached, you can still dial and at least trigger that, and really dialing 3 numbers, even if we're talking rotary, if you're 1 on 3. I think removing it from the wall, because if you left it in the wall, you could unplug it from the line itself, or you could cut the line. But I'm thinking if it's there on the wall, it's probably easier to reattach and to dial a number. I don't know. I mean, I'm talking like this is a very well thought out thing, and it may be and it may not be.
You're right. I had not not surmised that to have been a possibility, but yeah.
You wouldn't be able to hear the dial tone, but it would still be there.
Right. Days later, this phone was found discarded in a nearby creek.
Was it used to hit anybody?
Nope,
Okay.
not used as a weapon. Detectives considered robbery as a possible motive. There was an empty cash box that lent weight to that theory during the investigation. But again, the ferocity of the attacks, the contrast between the victims, it suggested something deeper, something more personal. At this point in time, the specific...
It also suggested a hatred of men, because it seems like the men were subjected to more violence or more rage. And again, the woman was strangled, which is not violent, but it's a very different type of violence than knife wounds.
Well, and I do think in at least one of the instances, one of the men was killed by strangulation and then stabbed. And I do believe that was the deacon. I think it was that he actually died of asphyxiation before he was stabbed.
The location of his body is very confusing to me, because they were, when you were speaking of them last when they were alive, they were all down there.
So
He went down there to ask the gentleman suitor to leave.
that was in the living room on the first floor. From my understanding, the deacon's bedroom was in the basement. It was a
Okay.
basement bedroom. And then upstairs was at least a restroom, Pam's room, and another bedroom.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said that he was upstairs and then was like, why is she still awake, and went down to the basement to tell the guy to leave. So you're saying that it was probably the inverse of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he probably went up the stairs to tell her that.
Okay.
Do I know that for sure? No. But I know he had a basement bedroom, and I know that's where he was found.
And he ascended
Right.
to tell them. Okay. Because in my mind, I was like, they were all down there, and then he asked the guy to leave, and then he ended up killed down there, but the other two were upstairs. So were they alive when he went upstairs to tell them to leave?
He sure was. They were, yeah.
All right. You got me. You got me, gal.
So the police did not immediately release all of the specifics of the manners of death associated with these victims, but they knew that they were dealing with stabbing, strangulation, restraint, and rage. Barrie police were faced with this nightmare scenario, a triple homicide that defied immediate explanation and left them with questions on questions. So 2 of the victims had been brutally attacked with a similar, if not same, sharp implement. The third had not. And Detectives McGarry and Schultz really focused on one question immediately. Why? What could these 3 victims possibly have done to be the recipients of such violence? Why were their deaths carried out differently? As forensic investigators meticulously collected evidence throughout the blood-soaked home, Detective McGarry again uncovered that empty cash box. They began to have to really consider the idea of a robbery gone really wrong. Schultz vividly recalls the unsettling feeling he had as he took in the crime scene, saying it was by far the most violent he had ever seen or witnessed in his own personal experience. And in his own words, said, "A monster was out there." The police, eager for answers, decided to then publicly release the names of 2 victims, the 2 that they knew, Pam Constable and Ellsworth Beers. They hoped that the release of the identity of these 2 victims would help identify the young man who had not been identified yet. On Monday morning, Marge and Phil Seabrook received a troubling call from their daughter, who asked anxiously whether they'd seen the news. It was then they learned that the female victim was Pam Constable, the girlfriend of their son, Scott Seabrook. Phil Seabrook remembers vividly jumping into his car, racing towards the home of Ellsworth Beers, and as he drove, he prayed desperately that his son's car wouldn't be anywhere near the horrific scene of the crime. His prayers, however, went painfully unanswered. Pulling up, Phil saw it. Scott's vehicle parked just beyond the yellow crime scene tape. At that heartbreaking moment, he knew instinctively, as he would later recall, his life had been taken and he'd gone to be with his Lord. Very chill recounting of this instance on Phil's part, which isn't to say anything negative, but it does seem that he was able to obtain a level of serenity from the idea that his son had gone to heaven.
Yeah, I think that that's fairly common with people who
Kind of
are
like the whole point.
very religious, is that they're able to come to terms with the idea that their loved one is resting in eternal
If you ever tell me someone I love is in a better place and they're dead, we're going at it. We're fighting it out. We're duking it out.
I'm not going to say it. I think once people are dead, they're dead.
Yeah. Only hours earlier, the night before the murders, Scott had excitedly spoken about Pam, the young woman he'd met at a church youth group gathering. Scott had been instantly taken with Pam, describing her lovingly, telling his parents her beauty comes from the inside, and emphasizing what a deeply godly young lady she was. Marge Seabrook remembers wistfully how she wanted to hug Scott goodbye that night before he left to see Pam. But by the time she had reached the front door, Scott was already gone. Scott had left to see Pam, planning to attend church service at his home church alongside... Did I say something wrong? There was a lot of...
To a chinge.
He had already headed out to see Pam, planning to attend church service at his own home church alongside his parents the following morning. He intended to invite Pam, excited about the idea of introducing her to his family for the very first time. Phil would later speak about the dreadful realization of what had happened, emphasizing his belief in the stark spiritual reality underlying the tragedy, and is quoted as saying, "We recognized that Satan used somebody to take the lives of these three individuals." He explained, convinced that the murderer had to have been someone deeply ungodly, someone that could be described as an apostate of Satan.
I don't think that Pam's exes would necessarily be people who didn't at least claim to be religious.
100%. 100%.
That may be wrong.
Religious psychosis.
This may have nothing to do with a former romantic partner.
My dog is jumping on the back of my chair right now.
Does he?
Sorry to interrupt you. No, I think he's just being a little dickhead.
Mine are being angels. They're both sleeping like little babies.
As Monday arrived,
I do want to say for the record, I think that it's the most likely that this is a former partner of Pam's, but that doesn't mean that that's what has happened.
Right on. On the following Monday, a multiple homicide wasn't the only challenge for Barrie police. Just 2 days prior to the incident on Peel Street, a cabbie had been murdered. He was found in the back of his cab with multiple stab wounds. Authorities immediately tried to link these two similar crimes, but they did not have nearly enough evidence or similarities to really work on them together. So instead, they were forced to work both cases separately. So much violence over one weekend in the community of Barrie was really wild, and it gravely concerned the local police department, which placed them into high alert, also placing the community on high alert. Somewhere, there was still a murderer running around Barrie. Police were hopeful when they discovered that 3 inmates had escaped from Beaver Creek Correctional Institution, which was only an hour north of Barrie. One of the escapees had even been convicted of manslaughter previously, and the police felt like they had got their breakthrough lead. It was going to be this escaped convict who had committed manslaughter.
Wouldn't that be just so easy for them to put a bow on it and not have to think that there was somebody in their community that was capable of this type of violence?
Well, just buckle up.
Buttercup, I'm there.
Because the escapees were found quickly. They had been holed up just south of Barrie, and the manslaughter, he was like, yeah, I killed them. End of story. Obviously, just kidding.
I was like, no, he didn't. Even if he said he did, no, he didn't.
It was quickly disproven. None of the escapees could be held responsible, even though they were holed up relatively close to Barrie. There was video surveillance, actually, at the place where they had been holed up. They couldn't have been involved at all in the murder of these 3 individuals, or these 4 individuals. So after that lead fell through, Barrie police launched a massive manhunt. And by the end of the week, authorities claimed that they had a few different suspects they might be looking at, or at least persons of interest, but they were still very far away from making any kind of arrest. Public fear was growing, and so was the pressure on investigators. By mid-October, autopsy results had arrived. And by mid-October, I mean I think 4 days post-murder, or post-discovery of the murdered bodies. But police declined to share any of the details of the autopsies publicly, and a media blackout had been imposed, which was a rare move, but it was intended to help protect the investigation. Part of Pam Constable's autopsy report was a semen sample that had been found and sent off for DNA testing. It was then learned that Pam had been sexually assaulted. Detective McGarry discusses, because a lot of the...
Which I said.
Detective McGarry, who he and Detective Schultz, the two primary detectives on this case, are featured heavily on the episode of 72 Hours, which is where I got most of my, a lot of my information from. So both of the detectives are heavily featured in this docu-series television show, True Crime. And Detective McGarry talks about how it wasn't clear to them that Pam Constable had been sexually assaulted because she was fully clothed. Due to the fact that her hands were bound and her feet were bound at the ankles, they assumed that her being fully clothed in that position meant that she probably had not been sexually assaulted. I'm just letting you know. I see the squinting, but that's what Detective McGarry has said.
I know you're just telling me the facts, but okay.
I just see that I wrote detectives instead of detectives. The fact that Pam's manner of death was different than the others forced the detectives to then consider maybe an acquaintance or someone who knew Pam had likely been the assailant and murderer.
I never thought of that.
And when the detectives considered when the detectives considered what all three victims had in common, I was really fucked up when I was typing this part up. What all three victims had in common, the Baptist church, they could not ignore the likelihood that the murderer was likely someone connected to all of them through faith. Barrie detectives were positive that the perp knew these victims, and at the very least, Pam. They began to question the neighbors of Deacon Ellsworth first, since it was his home, and they tried to get any kind of information they could about the comings and goings of the neighborhood that evening. And a lot of these wonderful Canadians, these Barrians, tried their best to be helpful, but unfortunately none of them really had any good information to share. Detective McGarry noted that there was one tip that was pretty helpful, and it helped the police force narrow down the timeline of events. So this witness, a local male, he had come forward and stated that he had walked by the residence that evening and that a green car had been parked out front with a red car behind it, which the red car would not have belonged to anybody in the home.
But the green car was Scott?
I think so. He also stated that he saw 3 people in the living room that night, and he said that 2 were dancing, but that there was another figure off in the shadows. Listen, I don't know. I don't know.
That makes this person suspicious to me.
Why? What's suspicious to me? This guy sounds so stupid. At nighttime, do people be having their windows open where people can see you doing shit with your lights on?
I think some do.
I'm not.
Not me.
You're not going to see into my home at nighttime. Not when I can't see you.
You know that I leave this big window open so that Molly can, look out it all day.
Nature's
and,
TV.
Yes. And once I notice, if I miss it, like during dusk to close the window, once I notice that it's dark outside, I leave the hall light off and the bedroom light off, and I come in here without any lights to close the blinds before I turn the lights on. I'm like, you are not looking in here while I'm in here.
You're not going to see me by myself in front of this fucking window. Not when I can't see you.
I just don't even want to have to. Yeah,
I hate that. I hate it. Even growing up in Ray Point.
But some people do. Some people do leave they don't have window
Some
coverings.
people want to be seen. They're exhibitionists.
Yeah.
Or they just don't give a fuck. I don't know how people don't give a fuck about that.
I think maybe some people don't think about it.
It must be nice to not think about things. So, with that being said...
And this is a residential street?
It is a residential area.
Okay.
Like a neighborhood.
Yeah, okay.
So, he saw what it sounds like, Pam and Scott dancing in the living room, but somehow a figure in the shadows.
Mm-hmm. That
Detectives...
unlikely, which is why I'm side-eyeing the hell out of this guy.
Detectives immediately thought, who could have been lurking in the shadows? Who was it that knew them that was just
the shadows
chilling out?
Inside.
I don't know. That wasn't clarified.
Okay.
I have the same question. I don't know if it was lurking in the shadows outside the house. I can tell you right now, if I am walking at nighttime and I walk past your house and I see some creepy person in the shadows, I'm not stopping to let you know. I'm booking it. I'm heading the other direction. You fuck up their life, not mine. I'm not going to get deaded, murdered. I'm running. So, are you telling them? Are you walking up to the shadow figure?
Walking up to is not how that would be handled.
Are you calling the
but
police? What are you doing?
maybe texting the police in 2025.
But there is nothing in 1994.
I know, but you're not asking me about. I'm at 5 years old. I'm not doing shit.
At 5 years old, I don't know.
You would have been 3 at this time. I'm not talking
At
about
3
then. I'm
years
talking.
old?
You'd have approached.
No, I don't think so.
No. So in today, if you're asking me what I'm doing, not me time traveling back to 93, I'm texting the police probably. But what you're really supposed to do is use a certain tone with them and just, acknowledge that you see them. Like, hey, crazy weather today or whatever. Hey, nice temperature. But you use a very authoritative tone. And I've never.
I'm
had
not.
one of those. Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not. They're going to authoritative my ass into the ground. No. Mm-mm.
I think the idea is that it, one, lets them know that they have been spotted, and
Yeah.
two, it kind of discombobulates them a
You've
little
been found out. You're thrown off guard.
bit. Yeah.
Shocked that someone sees you and knows what you're doing.
But I'm texting the popo. In this day and age.
Are you talking to them? Are you going to be like, how's the weather, bitch? Like, what are you? Because I'm not, no, absolutely not.
I'm definitely keeping my eye on them and probably texting the police, and maybe, if I can manage it without being spotted, snapping a little photograph.
Now, I would try to do that, right? Like, if I thought, I guess if we're in modern day and I see this happening, I would probably be like, oh, oops.
You're walking by and you've got your camera pulled up and you're like, hello.
It flashes from your face. I don't know. That's tough.
Yeah.
Anyways, this
person
witness
was
didn't do
walking
shit.
by?
Yeah.
They were walking by.
Right.
Okay. Let's be honest. I'm not walking by at night. I'm driving by, if anything.
Well, if it's in your neighborhood, maybe
I'm not
you're wanting
walking
to...
at night. I'm not doing
Okay,
it.
But you're in a safe neighborhood. You are...
That doesn't exist. That does not exist. I understand that some neighborhoods are considered safer than others. I don't think that a safe neighborhood is a thing. You are never safe. You have to be aware of your situation and your surroundings at all times.
I would argue most people don't think that way.
That's fine, but that is how I operate.
Right. Okay. So if you are a person who does trust your neighborhood and you're like, oh, thank goodness it's cool outside. I have to take Benji for a walk. I don't know.
Last night, because my mail doesn't get delivered until about 6 p.m. usually, and I needed my ID and everything to do stuff for my move. And I realized at 8 o'clock that because I checked it at, I want to say 4, and there was not anything in there. So at 8 o'clock, when I realized, oh, it's probably in there now, I got in my car and drove down my road to check my mail because I was not going to be walking alone at night in my gated community. So no, not me. Somebody else, that's fine. Not me. I'm trying to live.
Same. The funeral services for the victims attracted hundreds of mourners, including the detectives.
I'm letting people kiss me so that they don't feel rejected and then take out some sort of like male incel rage on me. Like,
yeah, no, I get it. I hear you. That's why I let people say whatever crazy shit they want to. I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. Do whatever, say whatever. I don't give a fuck. Just don't come kill me. Like, let me live. Let me be. Mm-hmm. Detective McGarry, so from my understanding, at the services for the victims, Detective McGarry is approached by several congregants. A variety of witnesses within the congregation pointed to one individual that they shot that they thought should be a suspect.
shot. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yes, shot be a suspect.
No, they thought should be shot. I thought is what you were going to say.
Yeah, firing squad, West Virginia, Mountain Mama.
Okay, but that was a choice. He made that choice.
All fingers pointed to Jordan Reardon. Jordan,
Why?
well, he
He
was
been infatuated with Pam. He had dated Pam.
he
had
was
been
a
rejected
congregant
by Pam.
that was heavily involved in their church community. He had indicated on a few occasions that he had a very strong interest in Pam Constable and dating her. At one point, it's even noted that there was a public confrontation involving Jordan and Pam about potential unwanted advances. However, it's not clear if these confrontations were between Jordan and Pam or Jordan and Scott or some combination of all three. From what I understand, it sounds more like it's Jordan and Pam, but that is not made crystal clear. However, these witnesses that did step forward made it very clear that there was this large unpleasantness that now hung over Jordan in relation to Pam. Like, it was very clear. That tension was palpable. Many of these same witnesses also shared that Jordan was describable as being odd and that he occasionally, quote, displayed unusual behavior, close quote. So detectives, after hearing so many people point to Jordan Reardon, decide to bring him into the station for questioning. And what's great is that Jordan voluntarily gives a DNA sample. He voluntarily gives his fingerprints. And he shares that he has nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
However,
in 1993, though, what did we know about DNA that would make
exactly.
him hesitant?
However, during this interview, a lot of Jordan's responses and statements seemed, quote, odd and rang alarms for the detectives. Detective McGarry remembers that Jordan was really suspicious from the jump, and he responded in a way that was indicative of an individual who was not indicative of an individual who had just lost fellow congregants and community members to murder. He seemed unfazed. Lo and behold, go ahead.
Isn't it less likely that the exchanges would have been between him and Scott because they were not members of the same congregation, right?
So here's the thing. Scott's home church was not the church where he met Pam, but Scott went to that church for their youth group activities. And so if the church...
At what age does youth groups stop?
I don't know. Don't ask me that.
Well, you told me she's in her early 20s.
Well, I think that some churches even did I don't want to say singles night, but I think it was normal for churches to try to marry their members off to each other. And so I don't want to say for sure that I know, but I do think that Jordan and Pam went to the same church. And it's very possible that when Scott went there for those activities that he had met Jordan.
We're probably descendants of these weird little arranged marriages that were just more convenient than anything.
Yeah. After taking Jordan's fingerprints, police were able to quickly match his prints to the crime scene. Jordan offered that several weeks prior to the murder...
He goes there all the time. That's
exactly.
The deacon.
He went to go visit Pam.
Yeah, with an unwanted proposal.
Jordan also made sure that detectives knew that he had never, ever been in the upstairs of the home. So how in God green's earth could he be responsible for her death? He had never even been upstairs. And that's when Jordan unknowingly gave himself away. Detective McGarry quickly noted a crucial detail. Investigators had let no information about the upstairs area of the home, or specifically where Pam and Scott's bodies were discovered.
Right, how did he know?
Had never been shared publicly. Detectives' attention sharpened immediately.
I couldn't have killed them upstairs. I'd never been upstairs. When did we say they were upstairs?
It's how stupid. How stupid. I could see how it's a mistake someone would make, but if you're lying to protect yourself from charges of murder, get it together.
You know what would never happen? This is yet another situation that I would not find myself in, because I'm not saying a fucking word. You're going to take me in and ask me questions, not without a lawyer. And you know what that lawyer's going to say? You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that.
Yeah. I'm not talking to the law without a lawyer present.
Not me. If you're going to try to convict me of something, whether I did it or not, I'm not going to help you do it. I'm not going to help you along.
Right.
You wrongfully convict me, sure, but I'm going to go down with a fight.
Mm-hmm. With this suspicious slip up from Jordan Reardon, detectives promptly secured a search warrant for his home. Upon executing the warrant, they discovered some really alarming evidence.
I know this dude's an idiot.
Jordan Reardon, for some reason, had heaps of rope, several pieces of which had been meticulously tied into knots that seemed identical to the one used to restrain both Pam and Scott. They also discovered a first aid manual lying conspicuously open with
Conspicuously?
Conspicuously. Mm-hmm. What did I say? Conspicuously? Lying around conspicuous.
Now you're just thrown off.
Conspicuously open with highlighted sections specifically focused on asphyxiation, the exact method of death suffered by Pam. Detective Schultz and McGarry grew increasingly convinced that Reardon was their man. Armed with this mounting circumstantial evidence, Detective Schultz and McGarry carefully built their case against Reardon and presented it to the Crown Attorney. Disappointingly, the Crown Attorney determined that the detectives did not yet have sufficient grounds or evidence to proceed with formal charges. Specifically problematic was their inability to definitively place Jordan Reardon at the residence on the evening of the murders. Imagine that not being enough.
I don't hate that it's not enough, right? Because it lessens the likelihood that we're convicting people wrongfully. Mm-hmm. And so I like that because turns out I really dislike wrongful convictions. But
I am an innocent until proven guilty kind of gal. I am a due process diva.
Yeah.
I think that you should be able to say with a pretty high level of certainty that someone was at least at the scene of the crime.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm also thinking 1993, though. I mean, how do you prove anybody was anywhere without cell phone data?
Other than eyewitness accounts, which are notoriously unreliable.
And the dude walking by saw him lurking in the shadows.
Well, much like you, Detective Schultz and McGarry had the same idea. They needed to turn back to that valuable eyewitness, the man who had observed.
What about the semen?
So at this time, DNA testing for things like that took upwards of a year in Canada. So we're still talking, like, at this point in time, they're in the first 2 weeks following the investigation. So all of these things are happening pretty rapidly, but that semen's not going to come back for a year.
Do you remember Deliana Hang?
I do. Do I remember details? No, except the necklace.
If I'm not mistaken, it was the late 80s. You remember the blood test where, oh, I bulked up like this because I'm on this very specific diet that the doctor gave me, da-da-da-da-da. And they ran that blood test relatively quickly. I want to say they got that guy pretty quickly, too, considering, I mean, remember the fingerprints on the glass that were like this and not like this? All right. I guess what I'm saying is I think they could have done it faster, but fine.
That is not the sentiment expressed in the series.
Actually, though, if the testing is that new, but word of it has spread and it has become widely accepted, then all of a sudden you've got a backlog that all sorts of departments are bringing to you. So I can see if it's going in order that it arrived in.
Right.
If that's how it's being prioritized, then yes, it could take a long time. Okay, I accept it.
Okay.
Fine.
So because of that limitation, McGarry and Schultz turned back to their most valuable eyewitness, the man who had observed the mysterious third figure lurking in the shadows. The witness, Eric Ross, appeared deeply committed to assisting detectives in any way possible. To further support the investigation, Ross agreed to undergo a somewhat unorthodox investigative method, and he was hypnotized. The goal was clear: enhance his memory to gather additional critical details. What authorities were really hoping for was that this would allow him to unlock a memory of a vehicle license plate or more details about the perpetrator or this alleged third figure. Under hypnosis, Eric Ross was indeed able to provide some additional minor details. Unfortunately, all of these details did not include a license plate number or a partial license plate number, nor was he able to recapture any additional details about the shadowy figure.
I do have a question. And my question is, what type of vehicle does Jordan drive?
I have no idea.
Is it a red
Don't know.
sedan?
Not sure.
I do think at some point circumstantial evidence does take us beyond reasonable doubt, right? If he drives a red car, if his fingerprints were there, if he has the slip up about it happening upstairs or the body's being found upstairs.
I think you're right.
His semen found inside of her that we'll find out about in a year.
That was detectives' biggest hang-up, their biggest qualm. They knew that that would be the linchpin, but they didn't want to have to wait for a year and allow this guy to just roam free.
Right, because they have to track romantic interests of him because clearly he's a creepy McCreeperson and probably not going to be received well by the girls he sets his sights on.
Yeah.
Plus, if he's already killed 3 people, I mean, I don't think you accept rejection well after you've already committed a triple homicide.
A triple homie makes you feel like that might not be the personality trait he possesses. It was hard for detectives to not feel like they were back at square one. However, not all hope was lost. It's so funny, we've already talked about this, but that one vital piece of evidence left was the DNA sample. If the DNA from Pam's attacker matched Reardon's, detectives would have the concrete proof they need to place him there at the scene of the crime. However, at the time of this investigation, DNA testing tech was still in its infancy. Processing samples and receiving results would often take up to a year or longer, and that was a really frustrating reality for the detectives. Schultz, McGarry, and the entire police department shared the same grave concern. What if the killer struck again before the DNA evidence was returned? Tragically, that is exactly what happened. While the investigation into the triple homicide and sexual assault trudged along, Barrie police were suddenly called to a scene of another violent assault. On March 1st, 1994, a frantic call came in. A young male had been stabbed in the back of the neck. He ran out of his residence screaming, desperately shouting that his mother had also been attacked. Officers swiftly arrived at the scene and apprehended the assailant. Uniformed police took the attacker into custody and transported him directly to the Barrie police station. When the attacker was brought into the station, police, detectives, everyone immediately recognized him. Their minds instantly flashed back to the triple homicide of Pam Constable, Scott Seabrook, and Deacon Ellsworth Beers.
You're really burying the lead on this one.
It was Eric Ross, the eyewitness.
I told you I was side-eyeing him.
The police department was utterly shocked. Detective McGarry explains that Ross had never been known as any kind of violent figure within the community. He wasn't someone who had ever caused any kind of concern before. But as the arresting officers interrogated Eric Ross, detectives McGarry, Schultz, and other investigators listened closely. During that interrogation, they learned something previously unknown about their helpful eyewitness,
who had inserted himself into the investigation and was going to do whatever he could to get somebody else arrested for his crime.
Eric Ross had a pretty severe drug problem involving crack cocaine. Ross, this tells you how much I know about drugs, because I was like, oh, what? Ross was injecting cocaine as well?
I think that's the crack, right? I don't know. I don't know either.
I think you smoke crack, right? Crack pipe.
Do they do cocaine in a liquid form?
I don't know. What am I missing out on that you can just inject this shit? Anyways.
Wait. We need to spend a little bit of time on that. What am I missing out on?
What is it that's going on that you can inject it? I know you can snort it. How do you inject it? It's a solid powder, right? Do you have to put it in a liquid suspension? Does it go into a centrifuge?
Saline.
How are you getting it into your body via needle? Stew on it.
I think it's probably, if you're injecting it directly into the bloodstream, it's probably faster acting and...
I think the shit's already pretty fast acting.
A more intense. Yeah, but it's going in through the mucous membrane in your nose if you're snorting it.
Maybe it's different like with marijuana. If you smoke marijuana, it activates a different mechanism versus the oral consumption of marijuana. It's two different types of high.
What? I know nothing about drugs.
I know that much.
I know, but you and we're sitting here like, you can do liquid cocaine injections?
What are the mechanisms of cocaine? How can we use it to get high? Not that we're trying to get high with it. During questioning, Ross openly admitted to police that when his drug dealer refused to sell him drugs, he decided to take revenge, attacking the dealer's wife and son, stabbing them both.
Wow.
On a sudden...
If that's your primary source to supply your addiction, might be a bit of a, breaking ties situation if you stab their family.
Bit of a shot in the foot.
Right.
Yeah. On a sudden hunch, Detective Schultz requested copies of the crime scene photographs from this new attack. He carefully compared them side by side with photos taken at the triple homicide on Peel Street. Immediately, there were a couple of consistencies. Most strikingly were the stab wounds to the back of the neck, identical in style and placement to those suffered by Scott Seabrook. Detective McGarry clearly recalls how skillfully and convincingly Ross had guided him and Schultz away from the truth, away from himself during the original investigation. With this revelation, homicide detectives took control of the interrogation, determined to extract the full truth from Eric Ross. By this point, Ross was exhausted, strung out, and defeated.
Probably going through withdrawal.
And finally, Eric Ross opened up, revealing his entire story. What followed stunned even the most experienced detectives. Sitting in the interrogation room, Eric Ross began to speak. However, he did not start or begin with the triple murder of Ellsworth, Pam, and Scott. Instead, Ross began his confession confession across town in a deserted parking lot. Ross admitted that he had robbed a cab driver at knife point and subsequently is what I said, but subsequently is what it should be.
Right. You do
And
that occasionally. And after that,
following and subsequently, at knife point and subsequently stabbed him to death. The money he stole from the murdered cabbie had funded his drug purchases later that same night. The following evening, Ross was broke yet again, desperate and craving another fix. After leaving a party, he spotted a young couple standing outside the residence of Deacon Ellsworth Beers, Pam and Scott. Ross approached, pulled his knife, and quickly grabbed Pam, holding her at knife point. He threatened Scott, instructing him to go inside the home or Pam would be killed. Intent on searching the house for valuables, Ross then forced Pam to tie up Scott. Then Ross tied up Pam. Ross began his search of the home and found only $40, not nearly enough to satisfy his drug habit. And while he searched the home, Deacon Ellsworth awoke due to the commotion, calling out for his granddaughter. Attempting to protect him, Pam stayed silent at first. Then she actually calmly spoke out and told her father to go back to bed, that she had simply dropped something. Deacon Ellsworth did just what she said. Ross then forced Scott and Pam upstairs and placed them in separate bedrooms. When Scott attempted to escape, Ross violently attacked him, stabbed him repeatedly before ultimately killing him with a vicious blow to the back of the neck with his knife. Ross then turned his attention back to Pam. He strangled and sexually assaulted her. Now that's how the information is presented, so I suppose that's the order of events, but I'm not sure. Fully aware that Ellsworth was still in the home, Ross saw the elderly man as a liability, someone who could somehow potentially identify him or information about him later. Ross went down to Ellsworth's basement bedroom, beat him viciously, strangled him, and then stabbed him repeatedly, violently, in an attack most marked by excessive brutality. In graphic detail, Eric Ross described precisely how he committed each murder. Detective Schultz recalled the confession as profoundly unsettling. He said that Ross delivered his confession without remorse, without emotion, and while maintaining a flat effect. With his confession,
I sometimes think of the reality that people who are suffering with substance use disorder, especially when the substances are like cocaine, meth, heroin, that I almost think of reality for them as like a video game.
right.
Kind of. So,
Well-
because the only thing they're looking for is their next fix.
Yeah.
Nothing
I
else
mean,
is real or matters.
most of those drugs are neurotoxins, especially to the prefrontal and frontal cortex. Like, no decisions they make are going to be sound. With his confession now on record, detectives moved swiftly. Eric Fitzgerald Ross, 28, was officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Fred Shapcott, the cab driver, Ellsworth Beers, Pam Constable, and Scott Seabrook. He also faced 2 additional charges of attempted murder related to the March 1st attack on the woman and her son. Interestingly, one lead had quietly emerged months earlier. A local cab driver had provided information that had hinted at Ross's possible involvement, but at the time, police thought of Ross as being a cooperative eyewitness, and so they felt like they had no reason to pursue him. So once police had this outburst and this confession, they said, oh, okay, well, I guess he probably is responsible for these things. And with him now formally charged and legal proceedings beginning,
He lost his train of thought.
now that Ross was formally charged and legal proceedings had began, the police force, the detectives hoped that things would be smooth sailing, but that was not the case.
How?
Ross's defense team filed motions challenging the admissibility of his confession, arguing that Ross, exhausted and coming down from a drug-induced high, was in no condition to give a voluntary statement. One of the most contested moments involved a confession given at 7:18 a.m. on the morning of March 1st. His lawyers insisted that it should be thrown out. The court disagreed. I don't know the pronunciation of this term, so maybe you can help me. During a voir dire, Voirdire, and I feel like I've heard the term before. During a voir dire, vidder.
I want to say voix is right.
Voir?
Voir.
Voir dire? Voir d'or.
Turns out I cannot help you.
Oh, voir dire.
Voir dire.
A preliminary examination of a witness or juror by a judge or counsel. So during a voir dire, a hearing to determine the admissibility of key evidence, the judge ruled that Ross's statements had been made voluntarily despite his state of fatigue, and his confession would stand. As prosecutors built their case, they also considered including testimony about a separate attack where Ross had assaulted a woman and her son, but in the second hearing, the court ruled that so-called similar fact evidence would be too prejudicial to present to a jury. Eventually, Ross pleaded guilty, but not to first-degree murder. Instead, he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of manslaughter.
Sure.
Ross was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I mean, technically, he kidnapped Pam and then held all of them hostage and then intentionally murdered them, particularly Ellsworth. He went out of his way to kill him. Sure, we can make a case for he wasn't planning on killing Scott, but Scott tried to escape, and so he killed him, but that wasn't part of his plan. Mm-hmm. Sure, we can make a case for the same of the strangulation of Pam, although once he killed Scott, I think the other 2 were going to be killed.
It was an inevitability.
Right, but also if he felt that he had to kill the cab driver, Fred, for the money, then I think once he saw the opportunity at the deacon's home, that they were all dead. So I mean, I think manslaughter is bullshit, but what do I know?
So
especially in Canada, where I know you're going to take issue with the length of the sentence.
Well, with that being said, like, I saw and heard 2 or 3 different eventual sentencings. So even Detective McGarry himself says that Ross will serve the rest of his life behind bars, that there is no hope or chance of him getting out of prison, which seems to be the case because as recently as October 7th, 2024, Ross was denied parole. In a response to that decision, one of the victim's sisters shared publicly, "No, I'm not at all surprised by the decision. Relieved? Yes. Those most deeply affected by the tragedy struggled profoundly in its aftermath." Marge and Phil Seabrook recounted their difficult journey of carrying such intense pain. They spoke eventually about giving themselves the gift of forgiveness and how that helped them to achieve peace. Marge and Phil have expressed feeling free and finally complete in their emotional journey. The pain wasn't isolated to just the victims' families. The murders had a profound and lasting effect on the entire city of Barrie. Local newspapers reported that the community bolted its doors in the aftermath of the 4 killings, and that a, quote, shiver of fear ran through Ontario following the murders. Before October 1993, Barrie had enjoyed a reputation as a safe and welcoming town. But in the wake of the Pill Street murders and the death of Fred Shapcott, that sense of security was shattered. One journalist described the period as a, quote, very sad coming of age for the city, making the end of its innocence and the beginning of a new era defined by caution, trauma, and grief. Also, additionally, this case has continued to kind of haunt the public imagination for years, and it has been the subject of a few different true crime television shows. In 2005, it appeared on F2 Forensic Factor in an episode titled Rampage. It has also been discussed on an episode of the Morbidology podcast, which is where some of my information came from today. And most notably, it appeared in 72 Hours True Crime, which is where I took a lot of my information from today. And that's the story of the Pill Street murders.
He's not unintelligent, right, to come forward and claim that he saw somebody, because he knew that if there was somebody who saw him in the area, that he would have been screwed.
And he was convincing. Mm-hmm. Whatever he was doing worked. These 2 detectives seemed like reasonably intelligent men, very capable.
And it sounds like he was able to very effectively not lead them to believe that he was an addict.
He was very good at concealing his addiction. Mm-hmm. I think that might be one of the most surprising components of him being eventually fingered as the murderer, because I imagine that if you are on a drug-fueled rampage, I can't imagine it would be easy for you, especially if you're shooting cocaine, which I imagine all of those things would be difficult to hide. And so, I mean, I say that, but I remember in high school when kids would fucking put eye drops in their eyes before class after they got high at lunch. So, what do I know? We clearly don't know anything about drugs. I know something about Wellbutrin.
I had a thought. and it is now gone.
Were you going to ask me where you can find some crack cocaine?
No. I know you're not the source.
That's true.
I do remember. I am glad that the Crown said we don't have enough to arrest Jordan.
Unfortunately, they never revisit Jordan Reardon, so I don't know what came of that in terms of...
leave him out of it now.
Yeah, but I just mean, like, did they give him a call and say, hey, sorry, you've been cleared, we've got our guy?
No, they said, we're sorry.
Sorry about it.
Sorry about that, eh?
Yeah, poor Jordan Reardon.
But again, wrongful convictions happen that way, so I'm glad that they didn't do that.
Me too.
That was...
Who knows what would have happened if it had gone to court or trial.
I like a case with a plot twist or a little switcheroo happening, so I enjoyed that.
I'm glad you liked it.
I'm glad that I side-eyed Eric Ross from the beginning, though.
I would have liked it better had you not.
I was also buying into Jordan, but I told you I was side-eyeing the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Immediately.
I don't think I would have side-eyed him. I don't know. Maybe. The shadowy figure bit was weird, but I mean, not unbelievable. Okay.
I guess it's not unbelievable, but he is more likely to be the shadowy figure, isn't he? If he's...
I guess. I mean, he was. He killed them, so...
who's actually paying that much attention to the shadowy figures outside of the home of somebody else? I don't know. But
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it. I like the way that you structured it, which I imagine is probably not far off from the way that the show structured it.
You'd be right.
I know your methods.
Mm-hmm. Shout out 72 Hours.
Shout out. A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and then leave a really, really honkin' good review.
Recommend us to a friend and make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
That is correct, but that was my line.
Oh.
The part about End of Crime Pod.
Oh, sorry. It used to be my line.
It's okay. And now it's your line. Our email address is...
Why don't you do a line now about following us on Patreon?
Follow us on Patreon.
At End of Crime Pod.
At End of Crime Pod. We have tiers.
We have...
TIERS. Tiers.
We have one tier right now.
We have one.
But we do have a $2 supportive bestie tier that is available. Just for anybody who wants to show us a little bit of support. It is not necessarily free to put this podcast together. So
Believe me.
Yeah, a little bit would help.
Yeah, it is not free to bring you this fabulous content. We literally have to pay to have the content hosted somewhere in the nebulous internet. And that alone is kind of pricey.
Buying the equipment, and then, of course, we chose to bring on Sienna to do stuff. So anyway, all of that to say, we've got some tiers on there, and if you are able to throw $2 our way every month in exchange for this podcast that is otherwise free to you, we would appreciate that. Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so send us an email with questions or episode suggestions.
Or questions about how to sign up for the Patreon. Also, just thanks for listening and being here again on episode 42.
Yes, thank you so much. Until the next crime.